It's a great pleasure to be here in Dar es Salaam. I was here a few days ago when the President launched the first board meeting of the Leadership Academy here called Uongozi. So it's a great pleasure to see some of the faces that were there for the opening. I was very happy when I was invited to come and talk about the question of innovation and learning and the role of technology in supporting capacity development in Africa. It's a subject that I'm very passionate about, and it's good to be among friends, including, if I may say, an honorary Tanzanian, Jim Adams, who has been a friend of Tanzania for many years, and known to many of you in the audience, and a colleague from the World Bank. I thought I'd just give a little bit of a briefing of what ACBF is, because not many people may know the foundation, but also to quickly go into what the role of innovation is in capacity development, because it's one of these subjects that is difficult to describe to your grandmother. And so how do we use innovation to actually tell our grandmothers what capacity development is and how it should be improved? And then to bring a bit some ideas on how we would deal with the capacity questions in a complexity framework, and talk about how the foundation is taking these ideas forward, and a few concluding remarks. So we are 20 years old, and as you all know, 20 years old are in between teenagers and young adolescents and adults at the same time. And so we have that kind of character at the foundation. We try to look at new ideas, maybe learn from the past, but also to shape our own approach to doing things, using lessons on the ground. It's a membership-based organization. We have recently new members who have joined, so our membership keeps growing every year. It is founded by the African Development Bank, the World Bank, and the UNDP to build capacity on the continent and in Africa at large. And it does have a constitution that allows it a pretty wide mandate and flexibility in the way it goes about doing its work. So what is facing Africa? What are the opportunities and possibilities, and how can innovation and learning contribute to speeding up capacity development? Many countries are celebrating their 50th birthday since independence, and we thought that this would be a good opportunity to look at what has happened, and also to look at what the world was like when Africa got independence. Young people at the time of independence had a lot of optimism for Africa's future, and they were coming into this discussion on independence at a time where the world was changing. So, for example, in the first country to get independence was Ghana in 1957. That year, the European integration was starting with the formation of the EEC with the 6 first founding members. So Europe has gone a long way in terms of regional integration, and we are trying in Africa to get integration Africa-wide. Of course, sub-regional integration has gone quite fast, and the launching of the East African Community in July last year was a big milestone in that regard. And I'm happy to say, as we speak, there's discussions on whether SADC, COMESA, and EAC could be combined into one, and at the minimum to go with the harmonization of policies for these 3 subgroups. So integration has moved also on the African continent. We speak also about Western Africa, Central Africa. You have ECOWAS, you have ECAS, and so on. At that time also, Toyota exported its first car to America in 1957. Of course, today Toyota is the leading car company, and when you look now around Africa, you see a number of companies that are leading edge, and on the technology front in particular, particularly in the area of mobile banking, and we expect in the coming years to have more African companies leading in terms of their exports to the rest of the world. Travel was another thing. That was the year that the Boeing 707 had its Virgin flight. The first passenger jet flight took place in 1957. Today, I just came back last night from Bujumbura. It's very easy to get around. We have a number of young airlines growing on the continent, and every day you turn the page, there's a new sort of coalition in terms of passenger flight. And for the first time last year, according to the US Department of Transportation statistics, more Africans came to America and went back than came to America and stayed, which is an indication that Africa is attracting its people back and keeping them to a larger extent than it did in the past. In 1957, we had a breakout of the H2N2 pandemic. It started in Guizhou in China, and it spread around the world. The WHO estimated millions of people perished as a result of this epidemic. Today, we still are talking about global epidemics and the human-to-animal transmission of diseases. For a very fortunate reason, Africa has been largely preserved in that regard. And our hope is that if the models for urbanization continue, the possibility for keeping Africa out of these animal-to-human transmission diseases will be maintained. Of course, we do have other challenges that need to be handled on the epidemic side, including HIV and AIDS. There were 5 wars in 1957. You had the Cuban Revolution, you had the Malaysian uprising, you had the Mau Mau resistance, you had the Algerian War, you had the Cold War. Today, we still have conflict on the continent, in the rest of the world, but a large number of countries have gone through peaceful elections, even though we've had troubles in some countries in terms of elections, but having the leadership change is no longer a mystery, or it's now an expectation in Africa, and that's a big transformation compared to the past. And what about innovation? In that year, 1957, 84 new global establishments were created, but then there were also 25 that were dismantled. So there was a very active uptake and innovative space. The difference between then and now is that at that time, most of innovation was product innovation. And when you look at what's happening on the continent in particular, there's a lot of service innovation, and the examples I gave of the mobile banking hold. So Africa started 50 years ago with very different attempts at development. There was a big divergence that built between Africa and Asia for a number of reasons. Africa always had an idea of a Pan-Africanist model, so regional integration is not a new idea. It had been there 50 years ago. But the continent did not go very well. For the number of years after independence, it did extremely well, and then went through a period of deterioration in many global rankings and development. So what were the scholars saying? When you look at the scholars, the argument was that we have a number of things that the continent has been grappling with, which are a rich field for innovation. One is the history of the continent. Very rich history, very rich culture, a lot of opportunity to get new ideas looking back. Then there's a geography. We are the continent with the largest number of landlocked countries, which means any opportunities for development for landlocked countries have to come from integration and from innovation in the way we use ideas that do not involve travel. And that's the role of technology is very important in that regard. Policies, where one of the difficulties we've had in the past is not sticking to a direction of policy that generated long-term stability and employment. The one area the continent has been very good at is on macroeconomic stability. In fact, coming out of the financial crisis, Africa has pretty much resumed growth and is doing well in a number of areas, even better than expected at the outset of the crisis. So on the policy front, there's been a lot of thinking, a lot of innovation, but we're still lagging behind on implementation. And this is an area where innovation is needed. Infrastructure, huge bottlenecks still, and innovation in infrastructure will be a key field that we all need to look at. And of course, stability, which comes from inclusion of the population, involvement of citizens in their own future, and the technology potential and innovations in those areas are very important. So the continent has invested in the prime movers of development. It has surmounted some of the structural challenges to establish macroeconomic management. There are now a lot of efforts to diversify the economies and to come beyond extraction, because that's one of the areas which, in the last 10 years, most GDP growth in Africa came from the extractive industries, which didn't generate sufficient jobs. So there's still work to do in that area. But what I must say is very heartening as you travel around is pro-poor innovation and culture as a source for development. This is a huge, huge opportunity, and you see it in many places. You see it in the way people are collecting water, banking, trading, and even communicating. And then, of course, regional integration, both physical and political, will be key. Once the infrastructure is in place, the economies and societies will be integrated. Africa will be pushing ahead to achieve beyond the Millennium Development Goals. Food security is one question. We are a continent that should not have food problems because we have the richest and most underutilized land in the world. So just getting us right in the innovations in agriculture and transformation from production to usage. I just came back from Bujumbura. Farmers they called the sweet potato in Bujumbura a curse because there was so much production of sweet potato, it couldn't be sent anywhere, they just had to throw it back on the ground. And this is a very painful thing to observe when you realize that in many parts of the continent we do have problems with food. And there's no reason why we should not be able to preserve sweet potatoes and have them transported across to countries that need them, especially given the nutritive value of the sweet potato. And this is true for many other crops, but I bring that example because it's the most recent. And so growing national and regional capacity for successful development is a top priority for the continent, and that would also be the framework that can generate jobs for the burgeoning youth. We are the only continent that has a 3-to-1 ratio of unemployed educated people. So our education system is not generating people who can join the market. So there's something that we have to look at the continental level, and innovation in that regard is very key. So many opportunities. Where I see opportunities, there's a rise in partnerships, particularly in the production side to transform agriculture, utilization and dissemination of knowledge, a very good movement in terms of ideas in technology use. Some universities are now starting to become centers of knowledge exchange and application, both locally and globally. You see a lot more of the disciplines now being merged in order to give opportunity for technology to be used effectively. You look, for example, at agricultural universities on the continent, and they're beginning to be quite active in that. At the foundation, we have simple examples. The Ghana Institute for Management and Public Administration, which uses an e-learning platform to bring executives. They've trained 600 of the top leaders of Ghana after work who come and get trained. They bring in people from Liberia, from the Gambia, and it's becoming a center of development using technology for education. You have the Science and Technology Institute in Ouagadougou, which is owned by 14 member states, and they train engineers not only in the theory but in the actual practice. They have an e-learning platform that got 14 applicants from outside Africa who are willing to pay to follow an e-learning course from an African institute. So this is a big opportunity for generating ideas across the world. And then, of course, MIT OCW. I was very pleasantly surprised to see how many self-learners from the continent actually access MIT OCW and use the free content that's there to improve their knowledge and to improve their teaching. E-learning is very acceptable. When I went to the African Capacity Building Foundation, I was surprised at how many staff of the foundation were doing their master's degree following an e-learning program. Then they would go for 3 months for the residential part and upgrade their skills. All our executive assistants have a master's degree, which is an incredible achievement when you think about the difficulty of learning, particularly for young women with children, because of the possibility of e-learning. There are also other opportunities in terms of knowledge that can be transferred very easily. High quality services, because we have a shortage of teachers across the continent and a shortage of instructors. But there's still a question for the continent. We have not done enough in investing in science and technology education. And this is a big gap, tertiary education in general, but science and technology in particular. So the education sector has a key role in augmenting capacity to innovate. For example, on the research front, education can provide the ground for transformative capabilities. Looking at how you teach people already to start testing and generating ideas in the classroom so that they can take that skill to the workplace. Sharing of ideas and methodologies for teaching and pedagogy that can help people already learn how to learn from each other and learn from past experience. And the very important role of evaluation and assessment, which requires data collection, follow-through, analysis, all very highly dependent on innovations in how you go about using mobile technologies for data collection and so on. So education could be the real important founding ground for innovation in development, going beyond basic skills, introducing strategic thinking and research, looking around how policy formulation can be innovative, helping policy designers think of alternatives, how to embed process innovation during implementation. We have a huge backlog on implementation, infrastructure programs that have not been implemented. We need innovation in process, how to organize the logistics of construction, how to organize labor opportunities across the continent, tapping into countries when we have multi-country investments. Also skills and knowledge for scientific follow-through. A lot of the problems that we have on the continent require micro-observation and micro follow-through. And technology is a very good opportunity to innovate in this area. You look, for instance, at the traditional medicine area, where you can very quickly take a treatment that has been used for centuries, but people didn't know about it. It's working in a micro level and have it available across the board, including globally. We have some examples in HIV and AIDS, in yellow fever, where technologies like this have been spread out. But the African universities have a challenge. First, they have financing deficits, so they cannot already play that role because they have to, first of all, find the opportunity to finance their activities. Teacher-to-student ratios are very poor. Teachers are very poorly paid. There's political intrusion in the curriculum, which does not help, especially when you have politics and science. They don't always go together. So how do you remove political intrusion from academia? And there's also a growing divide between consistency and the need for continuous change, which requires good management and effective resource utilizations. So universities have to now balance between the new and the old, and striving to develop capacity so that they can negotiate what is really a very complex and networked world in an interconnected world. Universities now have to serve the private sector in terms of R&D and innovation. They have to also be the place where people get born with the right ethics and values so that we can deal with some of the difficulties the continent is facing in order to develop, like corruption and poor governance. But at the same time, universities also have to build the future leader, the young person who will come out, become an entrepreneur, join up with others, and think on a continental and a global scale. And that's a huge challenge for universities. So what is working on the continent? Mentoring and training programs that transfer knowledge. For example, IBM has a very good program which pairs up young Africans with leaders in the technology and leadership world in IBM, and they're able to get skills in a short period of time. You have local participation and identification of future leaders that can get trained through the system. There's a program that Finland has just started to support those kind of ideas. You have collective intelligence of society to extract knowledge, a large number of investments in this area, including by the African Development Bank and the World Bank, to collect wisdom at the community level. Social innovation, many social entrepreneurs now on the continent, and learning from India in particular. You see a number of very interesting examples. For lack of time, I won't be able to go into them now. But then connecting actors to problems and solutions. And this is where the technology platforms are really at their best. How to create a space where people, no matter how far they are, can be connected up to a solution. I was very surprised going into one of the websites where you buy a refrigerator, something goes wrong, there's nobody to fix it in your locality. You go on the web and you find 10, 20 people who have the exact same brand, and they tell you exactly what to do. Go behind, there's this little tube, open it, drain it, fix it in this way. And even if you don't have engineering skill, you are able through this user exchange to fix your own technology. So these are very good examples, because the next stage is to make your own refrigerator. It's not very far away. So complexity is a key issue. There are risks there. Capacity development is a complex field, and it requires a particular skill of how you can function in areas of low predictability. And so scenarios are a very key area for opportunity. When you look at capacity development, it's one of these areas where it fits the definition of a complex environment, because the more interaction you have, the more complexity you have. And in capacity development, there's a huge platform for interaction, because you are having individuals interact with organizations and society at large. The higher the complexity, the higher the potential to get new risks and challenges, but also new opportunities. But risks are the key area that we are concerned about. And so, for example, when you see social media, fantastic for getting people together, getting them on the street to ask for their rights. Lots of challenges when then you don't have an institution that can listen to these requests and meet them. So you have to combine this opportunity with institutions that can actually work to deliver on what is being demanded increasingly by an organized society. And then when complexity is high, it becomes more difficult to predict outcomes. For example, many people today will tell you, oh, we knew Tunisia would happen, we knew Egypt would happen, but it's much harder to predict. You know people are using technology and they are organizing, but you don't know exactly what will come out of it. It could come out very positive, it could come out quite negative. And this loss of predictability is an issue for us to think about, and that's where you need institutions so that you can actually manage regardless of the outcome. And so you need opportunities and approaches to guide leaders, to guide decision makers and analysts to be anticipating what can be happening when people are so connected. And that's a key issue. So what skills do we need in leaders? We need leaders who can adapt to global constraints. The financial crisis is an example. It had immediate impact. People who are managing macroeconomies had to update their models. They had to bring in new data to quickly understand what would it mean for the context. Then you need to be functional in low predictability, because you don't know what will happen and how, but you need to be ready to deal with it. You need to be aware of what others are doing and how they're shaping the global properties that are affecting your decisions. Again, leaders cannot be quietly managing your own local government or municipality or your ministry or your company. One has to be much more aware of what's happening in the rest of the world. But the fundamental is the values and the behaviors that serve as a guide in the area of low unpredictability. Because if that is strong, then it doesn't matter what comes out for all of these interactions, it would lead in the right direction. So I won't give you much of this. I know there's some systems people in the audience, but the key issue here is variation, interaction, and selection. How do you vary the environment in which people can find solutions? How do you select so that you can support those that would lead you ahead? And how do you create a space for interaction so that first, problems get discussed and resolved, and secondly, solutions get spread out quickly. So that's the key issue. And in capacity development, one has to think of how do you create an environment where people will bring in a variety of solutions. How do you create interactive spaces, and how do you help select, because policymakers have an accountability at the end of the day. They have to deliver results, development results. So it becomes very important how you select. So we use scenarios, and I'm not going to say much about this, just to skip quickly to say which were the 3 potential scenarios we had for Africa. One is where we continue in this trend with regional integration, and Africa really leads on a global scene. We have a sub-regional mosaic where we have sub-regions that are working very well, but others not, or things break up and you have externally driven environments. For example, what happened in Côte d'Ivoire, what happened in Tunisia, Egypt, Libya, most of this is still externally driven, and so the continent could go in that direction. In the first scenario, we would need to have certain capacities. One is that the agenda for development has to be broadly owned. The average citizen has to see themselves in that agenda for development. Africans have to lead in innovation, to have homegrown democracies, homegrown technologies, homegrown development strategies. And leadership has to represent the continent not only here, but also internationally. So those are some of the issues. And that would then have the continent have parity in terms of how governance is judged, parity in terms of how Africa contributes to international ideas, whether it's in finance, economics, or environment, and also that domestic results are visible, that conflicts are resolved, violence is prevented, and crime is controlled. But more importantly, service solutions actually are visible in health, in education, water, and so on. The middle scenario is where you have differentiated performance across different sub-regions. And so some sub-regions doing well, some not so well. But that success is limited but can be spread within a sub-region, and that the outcomes are visible but they are isolated. So this is a possibility, and this is where technology can play a role to break through these barriers that remove these isolation in solutions. And when we are in the third scenario, where country conditionality is what's driving development, there the key issue is delivery of services, transforming the agricultural sector to maintain food security, handling conflict, violence, whether ethnic, religious, or political, and also using new technologies to improve domestic production. So the role of innovation varies depending on the scenario, but in each of these there is a key opportunity. So we took a look at this and said, regardless of where you are, there's some critical things that need to be in place. You need to manage across sectors and geographies. That requires innovation and technology. You need to engage civil society, and doing it in a country and region as diverse as Africa, with huge communication difficulties by road and air and so on, requires some other non-travel means for doing that. Decision in making priorities. How do you judge, analyze? That means a lot of data analysis, thinking through, observing, collecting, and assessing. And then, of course, negotiation and managing, which requires you to understand what the other actors are doing, and, of course, the technological transformation in agriculture. So we use this to say, what should ACBF do? We have seen that that means we should be more flexible in how we support countries. We should help support countries that are already trying to reform so that we can speed up. We should help leverage rich countries to work in poor areas and help middle-income countries become effective regionally and globally. In terms of what we do, I mentioned the critical capacities, but I think perhaps it's more interesting to say, how do we do that? With whom do we work? And here is where technology really is at its peak. How do you bridge public sector institutions with autonomous policy units and think tanks, who are very important for generating the long-term strategic thinking, with non-state actors, the private sector, civil society, regional institutions, universities, training centers, but also dynamic individuals, because in all the stories of change and transformation, there was a dynamic individual behind that. And how they get connected, how they get leveraged, becomes a key issue. We have in our strategy a deliberate focus on experimentation and learning, whether it's in strategic partnerships with policy units, whether it's in support of post-conflict and fragile states, whether it's helping middle-income countries, or whether it's developing leadership. I will skip through a lot of this because I don't know how I'm doing on time. So I will go to the end. One thing I wanted to mention is that the assessment we did showed that when you look on the continent, whether you look at fragile states or stable economies, there's very little difference in the quality of institutions. So the big gap for the continent is to improve the quality of institutions, and how technology and innovation can be used for that will be key. I'll go to the conclusions because we are running out of time. I had wanted to share with you an example from Rwanda on how we go about making change. Just to say that capacity is a very complex process, and to be successful, one needs to be flexible and open to learning. Piloting and innovation are embedded in learning systems, and you have to have those learning systems so that you can uncover successful processes, successful designs. Technology platforms are a very useful tool, not only for speeding up adaptation and learning, but also to provide platforms for innovative ways of solving complex development challenges. E-learning in particular is a tool that could foster an environment that allows not only the application of complexity principles, but also in the practice of development. How? Speeding up interaction between learners, facilitating access to a wide range of ideas, and also equalizing the playing field and creating a meritocracy of ideas. And our experience suggests that complexity can be harnessed in designing capacity development interventions, but we first have to start accepting that development is a complex process that is designed in a way that learning gives you value, and that it underlines the importance of context, the importance of interdependency, and requires therefore local processes to take priority, but for them to be integrated at a higher level, and partnerships for implementation become key in that regard. We are a strong institution for capacity development in a fragile continent, but we believe that it's key to support the emergence of ideas, to support development in broader scale, and to scale up solutions to innovation and learning, particularly as in the way that they support the leadership that is involved in decision making on a day-to-day scale. Our experience shows that there are models to do so, but a lot remains to be done, and this can only be done in partnership with others. So thank you very much for your attention, and sorry for going so fast.